No, yes, you must put in your applications for our PhD, guys. You guys are working on some really interesting and cutting edge research. I mean, the land tenure, the land reform is a big, big issue in Africa because of our historical legacies, which we'll discuss when we talk about institutions. And also climate change and climate policies are now really at the forefront. There's a lot of literature coming out about climate change. I'm working on climate change with one of my PhD students because we're trying to understand a lot of the times, or what we are picking up in the literature, is that there are these policies in place, but they don't seem to be having the effect that you'd want to see, the change in people's behavior. But maybe it's because you don't understand, your community. You don't understand how the people are reacting to climate change. So we are looking at climate change awareness, and if people actually understand, because there's a question in one of the surveys where they ask the people, the citizens, do you know what climate change is, right? And quite a number of them are like, I don't know. So if you don't know what the issue is, you're not going to change your behavior, your consumption behavior, which is affecting the climate. So there's a lot of interesting gaps within the climate literature as well. And financial inclusion is always a big topic, because women are still struggling to be financially included. So there's quite a lot of literature in there. So this is really great. We've got diversity, but there are also synergies within this group, and that's the whole reason. And also what I like is that, we've also got a diversity of people coming from different African countries, which is great, because I think we are all, if you're like me, in a situation where you're like really frustrated with the continent, because we've got the resources, we've got the labor, we seem to have the human capital, or it's improving maybe, but we are still lagging. We're still the poorest continent in the world. And why is that? So these are some of the topics we want to try and understand in this workshop. So the way I've structured it is, today we're going to go through just briefly understanding the different growth theories that have been put forward by various economists, and just to get an idea of the factors that they argue contribute to or help a country to grow. And then tomorrow we will discuss, we'll go into detail into two prominent theories that I know are always, being discussed whenever anyone talks about economic growth. These are the growth models. So we'll go into detail in those ones, and also have some practical, like applications, some case study evidence as well. And then on Wednesday, we are going to look at institutions. So we're going to look at current institutions, how they affect economic growth and development. And then we are also going to look at historical institutions, because Africa does have a lot of historical events, external shocks that happened that affected its development path. And is that one of the reasons why you find Africa is lagging behind? Is it the lingering persistence of these historical events that took place? Then on Thursday, we are going to have a Stata practical. Just take you through some of the, how to use data in Stata and all of that. But this is also going to help you for Friday, where you're going to be working on your own assignment, where I just want you to develop a very simple 5-page report on Africa's development path using empirical analysis. So that's where the data is going to come in, your graphs, your regressions, whatever else you want to use from the data. And you just tell me your story about, how you are observing Africa's development path over time, and how do you see Africa in the future. So that will be a very simple project, just to see that, we were engaging in this workshop. So as I said, I want us to be discussing. So I'm just going to facilitate, I'm sort of introducing these various themes or topics under growth and development, but we have to be interactive, because we all need to understand what is happening if we want to give back. Basically, if we want to give back to our countries, to be able to help our countries to develop, because we all see the challenges in the African continent, in also other continents like South America, where they're also struggling. What is it that is it that we're getting something wrong, or what is happening? So I would like this to be more of a discussion forum than me just talking for 7 hours. Okay, so let's just open our thoughts to the whole topic surrounding economic growth and development. So today I've structured, okay, so admin, the bathrooms are just outside here. When you go out to your left, there's the male and the female bathroom. And then we'll have coffee break and lunch breaks, I think here. And I've sort of set it up that it's 1.5 hours, then a break, 1.5 hours, then a break. There's evidence that the human brain can only concentrate for 45 minutes, apparently. After that, nothing is going in. So, so if you're wondering why in undergrad the lectures are 40 minutes or 50 minutes, it's because they did their evidence and they found that this is how long you can concentrate for as a human being. I don't know how long you can concentrate for when you get older. I think it's even less. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so today we are going to discuss, I'll start with the definitions of growth and development, and then, how we measure them. And then we'll go over some empirical evidence of how growth has evolved, economic growth has evolved over time, the differences between countries and within countries, and then we'll end with growth and development theories that have been put forward. So that's how I've structured today. All right, so first debate. Is growth and development the same thing? Why do you say no? Economic growth, economic development. Are they the same thing? Yes, ma'am.
I think economic growth is part of economic development. So development is influenced by growth. But when you're looking at development, you actually look at it's a holistic approach. So you look at growth and you look at your life expectancy, you look at human welfare, and all of those things. But when you look at growth, it's just the production only. So I think it's influenced by growth.
So in the literature, I'm sure if you've read in the literature, they tend to use economic growth and the terms economic growth and economic development, synonymously, but they're actually different, because economic growth, you are looking at the production of goods and services. So what happens is, if in a period, typically, if your country has an increase in goods and services, and at the same time the average income of the economy increases, you are said to have had economic growth. But you can have an increase in GDP without actually improving the human welfare, without improving access to public resources, and that's where your economic development comes in, right? So economic growth is primarily is defined as an increase in production of goods and services in an economy. The modern concept of GDP was actually formalized by Simon Kuznets. This was after the Great Depression happened in America, and they were trying to understand, or to assess how bad the situation was in the economy, and they couldn't quite understand it. So this whole concept of GDP became even more formalized during the 1930s, and then it was adopted as a main measure at the Bretton Woods conference in around the 1940s, right? So what we find is that GDP per capita is typically used as a measure of standard of living rather than the level of GDP. So why wouldn't you use the level of GDP, like just national GDP, to measure standard of living in a country, why do you have to use GDP per capita as a better measure or as a more suitable measure of measuring sort of the wealth in the country? You need to adjust for your population. So if you look at China, China has a very large GDP. But when you divide by their population, it falls down into the developing economy category. But if we are using the GDP, China should be developed, right? Because it's right on par with the United States. But their population becomes an issue because then their population then determines whether that country is actually wealthy or not. So that's why GDP per capita is more commonly used when you're, writing about economic growth or you're writing about the wealth of an economy and you're using models. Ideally, you would want to use GDP per capita and not just the national GDP, because this one is a more suitable reflection of how well the economy is going. And these are just measures of, these are the formulas for measuring economic growth. You can calculate it as the percentage of change in income per capita between two periods. So last year and this year, what was the growth rate between 2024 and 2025 to see if the economy has actually increased in terms of production of goods and services. And then you can also use the average annual growth rate, which is over a long period. So sometimes you're just given that South Africa's income per capita was 1,000 US in 1960. It's now maybe 10,000 after 20 years. So you want to calculate how it was the average growth rate during that period. So that would be the formula you would use with the Y0 would be the initial income per capita and then that's your current income per capita, and that your T will be your period, the years that you are calculating the average annual growth rate over. And these are quite common in the literature or in when you're explaining growth rates between countries, because you want to compare especially the average growth rate over a long period. You want to compare that average growth rate to see if a country has been growing faster or slower compared to another country. So this is what we will typically be using when we talk about economic growth and when we start using data. Okay, so the reason why GDP per capita is not a good measure of welfare is because there are a lot of things that are not included in that measure, right? It doesn't measure happiness. It doesn't measure home production. When you look after your children at home, that is human welfare because you're taking care of your children. You are able to look after your children, but that doesn't get measured in GDP per capita. All GDP per capita is measuring is the production of goods and services in the economy. How many cars were you able to produce this year? How many cell phones, laptops were you able to produce this year? How much investment did the government spend in infrastructure, right? How much did you spend in the military? That's what's captured in GDP. But then the subjectiveness of your human welfare doesn't get captured. And it's quite a contentious measure, especially with developing economies, because they tend to say that, oh yeah, poor countries, you're poor because you've got low levels of GDP per capita. But they're saying, yeah, our wealth may be low, we may have low incomes per capita, but we have made inroads in access to health for our people. So we have made inroads in human welfare, in improving human welfare for our citizens. So even though our GDP per capita, when you compare it with the rest of the world, is lagging behind, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are not making progress in certain aspects, and those aspects of development are not captured in the measure of GDP per capita. So it's quite a contentious measure, but we don't have any other suitable measure, so we continue using GDP per capita. There are other measures you can use, which I will come to today, come through now just recently. Another aspect that's not measured by GDP per capita: informal economy. We can't measure that, right? And also illegal activities. The drug cartels. They have a lot of money which goes into the economy, but we can't measure that, right? So I know. Right. Okay, so economic development, as we said, it encompasses not only your economic growth, your GDP per capita, but also broader aspects of life, right? Such as your health, improvements in standards of living through better health outcomes, better education outcomes, better access to infrastructure, better access to water and sanitation, to electricity. You don't have to go outside to use the toilet. Toilets are now indoors. That is a sign of improvement in human welfare. It shows that you have come where you've come from, which is Blair toilets, to now having a toilet in your house. You've come from using, wood, paraffin, all the dirty energy or dirty fuel to cook outside, or, cooking in an enclosed hut. Every time I go to my grandfather's farm, because it's still, it's in the rural areas. So the toilet is still outside, there's no electricity, and they cook in the hut. So when my grandmother was alive, because I suffer from asthma, when my grandmother was alive, she would always make sure that I don't go into the kitchen because of the smoke, because there's no windows, so it's only the door that's open. But a lot of the kids, they always thought I was just a snob because I didn't hang out in the kitchen with them, but I was like dying. But this is still the way it is in the rural areas, right? There hasn't been much improvement. What my mother has managed to do is to build a sitting toilet outside, but it's still a Blair toilet because you can't flush it because there's no access to water. And we still have to go with the donkey carts to get water to bring it to the rural areas, right? And then my mother's brother, my uncle, he's now trying to pull electricity into the village so that we have access to electricity. But the fact of the matter is, that is an example of very slow progress in human welfare for people that live in my grandfather's area. And this has been like that for many years, because I every holiday would always go there, especially during the planting season. And and development there for me, every time I go there, being a development economist, I feel like there's not a lot of progress happening. But I think that for the people that live there, when they see a house going up, even if the toilet is not inside the house, for them it's an improvement because they've now got a roof over their heads. So there are also different views depending on the situation that you're in, right? So for us, that is not a sign of development. For us, development is what we have here. We've got access to electricity, Wi-Fi, we've got our cell phones, cell towers, and everything. So economic development can be measured using indicators such as life expectancy. So if your life expectancy in the country is high, is increasing, it means you have better access to health. So you live longer. And if you look at the life expectancy trend of Sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, we still have the lowest life expectancy. I think it's like about 75, or at some point it was 65, whereas the others are in the 80s, you know. So if you go to developed economies, you're likely to live longer than if you live in poor countries or developing countries, right? Infant mortality rates is another indicator of development. School enrollment rates, particularly your completion rates. Yes, sir?
Yeah, you said if you live in a city or if you live in developed country,
If you live
to have a long life.
in the developed country, I have, so
So I think we need clarity on that.
yes, okay. I know what you're saying. You're saying that in the developed countries, they also have their inequalities, so the people in the rural areas would not be living.
Not only that, when you live in a developed country, you are living in the city, pollution, loss of can also affect.
Your life expectancy. Okay.
So you have to talk about maybe rural area, farmer.
Okay. All right. I understand what you're saying. But I think on average, the life expectancy in developed economies, even with those with those sort of environmental issues taking place, is still higher. And you bring up an interesting question. Why? Why, considering that they are the biggest polluters, right? But why is it that they still seem to be sustaining their population and providing them access to the health that they need? Yes.
The social activities that they give back to the citizens or the populations, it's quite better than.
Exactly. Yes, yes. And they also have national health insurances, that policies that are in place that actually work. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, in addition to that, pollution is a global thing. So when GHG gases are emitted, it doesn't affect a specific environment. That's why Africa bears the brunt of this pollution, yet we emit fewer gases.
Yeah. So these are the interesting dynamics that we will be covering, right? To understand the differences in development outcomes and, well, economic growth and development. I see 3 hands. I think I saw, sir, you had yours. Then I'll go there. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
This might not be for you, Prof, to answer, but just for all of us to think about. I wonder if having a younger population does it necessarily balance out some of the impacts of, for example, life expectancy? That is, maybe if we compare Africa to the rest of the world, that would have at least a relatively longer life expectancy. Because I think we should be doing better, at least now, then we know that we are going to die in the long run.
So I like what you're saying about the young population. So tomorrow we're going to cover 2 models that discuss population and the different effects they have on economic growth. But in response to you, yes, countries or regions with younger populations, ideally we should be seeing progress. But the question is, are you investing in the human capital, in skilling the young population? That's the question we need to answer. Yes, sir. And I saw the 2 of you. Yes, sir.
My interest, I'd like to get you just in short, in terms of the definition of development in this sense, how much of its definition has a Western bias, because it's subjective. Welfare is subjective, sorry. And having been born and growing up in the rural area, what I can tell you for sure is by happiness and being self-actualized, folks in the rural area are doing the most. They are happy, they are good. And it takes a little things for them, by way of need, for them to actually, what moves them, for instance, in terms of urbanization, is not your significant things. It's just that there are no proper healthcare facilities closer. And if one gets sick, things are far. But if you can have just the basic minimums closer to them, they would never even dream of going to the city because they are happy there. And I don't think this definition of development in the sense of how it is now actually captures that. So I'm interested in the Western bias in this definition. Also, for everyone who is here, to look at Amartya Sen's, the Indian economist, development economist, definition of development or growth, which basically speaks to one's ability or capability to actually access what is valuable to them rather than a universally defined basket of things to tick.
Yes, so I agree that there is a Western bias in the definitions. So there is literature that looks at subjective well-being versus objective well-being. And these measures are typically objective well-being because we can observe them. We can't observe subjective well-being, right? So that's why your survey data sets then become important, because there you're asking your citizens how they perceive their life, how they perceive the progress of their life. I know there's the South African social attitude survey, there's the Afrobarometer, there's the World Value Survey. They even ask you to compare your well-being to your neighbors to see if you feel, if subjectively, do you think you're improving? So you're quite right. I mean, but I guess given the fact that it's very difficult to capture subjective well-being, we're kind of forced to use the objective well-being. But definitely you're right that people need to be cognizant and to be aware that it is a very objective measure. And just like I was saying, that when I go to my grandfather's village, for me, that's not well-being. I'm thinking, oh my God, I can only do 2 days there, and then I need to go back home, right? But I can see my cousins there, or the people that have grown up there and they live there. For them, it's, they're happy. For them, if I was to ask them, are you happy? They'll probably tell me yes. And I'll be like, why? You've got no electricity, you've got no water, you have to walk for your water. The nearest school is like over the mountain. The nearest clinic you need a car to get to the nearest clinic, So, but like you're saying, a tiny improvement in the rural areas, the returns for them will be so much greater than us, being given better access of electricity from ESCOM, because we know that we deserve that because we are paying for it. So ESCOM providing us with electricity is, for us, that doesn't measure in our subjective well-being. Yeah.
Okay, so to add to the discussion on why developed nations, despite their heavy pollution and all that, they still have high development, economic development indicators. So I was just trying to bring to the fact that they try to do things to make things much more easy. So now there is the issue of the climate market, where the countries in the global north are trying to finance countries in the global south to be able to make up for this climate change issue that we are talking about. So they are trying to make things better, you understand? So at the end of the day, even though they are contributing so much to climate change, they are also looking at ways to offset these emissions that they bring. So they take initiative, unlike we in the developing countries where you don't see that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to ask whether crime is captured, because I know in the global north they usually have little to no crime, and I'm thinking maybe that could be one of the reasons why their life expectancy is high. And also to add to the discussion of environmental considerations, isn't the EKC says that in order to grow we need to
Pollute more, yeah.
Yes.
And then
And another discussion, so when I was doing my master's, I was looking at rural nodal district municipalities, right? So it was a matter of saying that if we like invest in terms of like infrastructure, is it going to bring growth? Because it like the finding was there was no relationship between economic growth and infrastructure, because it's not about building the road, but you have to use the road. Yeah.
yeah. So we're going to cover a model tomorrow that will explain exactly what you're saying, that is it just a question of investing in infrastructure? Because we can, it's easy to build roads, it's easy to build hospitals and clinics, but do you have the resources? Do you have the doctors and the nurses to then work in that infrastructure and then provide the actual service to your population so that you have a healthy population that can be productive? Do you have the manufacturing industry that uses the roads to transport goods and services, right? So that, again, you can have an increase in production and services. So yeah, that's really, so this is good. We're setting ourselves up nicely. All right. So, so economic development is also accompanied by structural change in the economy, right? So this would be an example would be reduced fertility rates. So if you look at the fertility rates in your developing countries versus your developed countries, or your global south versus your global north, developing, developed, global south, global north, low income, high income, there's so many terms that are used to separate. So so you'll find that in the global north, they are having, per annum 1 to 2 children per woman per annum, if I'm getting that definition correct of the fertility rate. If you take Africa as a continent, I think we have come down to about 5 or 6 children, which then links to the gentleman's contribution of population growth, that we have a young population. And they're saying that by 2050, if we continue growing our population at the rate that we're growing in Africa, we will surpass Asia in terms of population. But is it good or bad? That's what we need to, is it bad to have a increasing population? It's subjective. Subjective. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay. So important to note is that economic growth without simultaneous improvement in human welfare is often an indicator of new income that's not being distributed to everyone in the economy. So this is where our issue comes, is that yes, we can be increasing our GDP per capita, we can be increasing our production of goods and services, but at the end of the day, is everyone being included in this new wealth that's being generated? And we find that that's not the case, right? That's why within countries you still have these, inequalities, where you still have people that are living below the national poverty. Why are you living below the national poverty? You're working on natural resources in Mozambique. Natural resources are an amazing mechanism of increasing wealth in the economy. And yet your resource abundant countries suffer from the resource curse, right? We have a lot of natural resources in Africa. We are the poorest continent. How is that? We're the poorest continent in the world, but we've got gold, we've got diamonds, we've got oil, platinum. Where is the wealth going? Yes.
African countries, we struggle with the issue that has to do with political activities that leads to corruption. As you can see now, for an example, if you can look what is happening across African continent, this recent development, this shows you that actually we have that possibility to reach higher level, if you can have ethical leadership, I don't want to mention countries and name of individuals, but this is what we need as African continent in order for us to ensure that whatever name that we can attach to this economic growth and development we can see it in practical. But what is happening currently, I think, is
It's not right. It's sad, right?
now, for example, to add this as a comment, for example, here in South Africa, we see some changes, dynamics due to the political landscape in the form of GNU. Now we are noticing some trends, some changes. So, yeah.
Yeah. And if we bring into that mixed land is another resource which we have. And again, look at the contentious debate around it because of politics, right? We're going to cover this in institutions. There was a hand here, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to link it to the fact that we've got this foreign interest that, though that is very, very debatable, but we all know what's going on in Burkina Faso at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, with France and the US. So in as much as we have to deal with corrupt African leaders, we also have to deal with foreign interests that do not want us to grow.
Yeah, that's true. I used to have a mentor who always used to tell me that he would say, Carol, this was my, my PhD supervisor. He'll be like, Carol, tell me what would happen if Africa became developed. What would happen to World Bank? What would happen to IMF?
I actually agree with that. I think we underestimate the impact of colonialism in Africa, especially if you compare to the rest of the global south countries which were also colonized. So there's a guy called Walter Whitney who wrote about how Europe underdeveloped Africa.
Yes.
So if you look at how even our economies are structured in terms of infrastructure, they were built to be extractive economies, to be extracted, not to develop by themselves. Hence you find even with the closest countries, we cannot have high trade because we don't have infrastructure to facilitate the trade. At a port between South Africa and Botswana, you spend more time than when we are shipping things to the US.
Yeah.
You ship them in a less and much more efficiently.
Yeah.
So that is by design. So I agree with that the foreign interests, if you look at our markets, for instance, the banking industry and all, they don't have an interest of development for Africa necessarily, but to extract as much as they possibly can.
And it's interesting you say that. You know, we've got these Timu and Shein, those people that women do online. It takes like 3 to 5 days when you've put in the order for it to come. If you, when you go to the border, I travel to Zim a lot, the line of trucks that will be stuck and not, and these are trucks carrying goods or inputs that need to be used in the country. And they're stuck at the border for days on end. Why? And yet it's so easy for me to, from Asia. And then when I was in UK, I was making some online, buying some online stuff within Europe, like this. It was like, oh, this is coming from Scotland. And the next day, it was a next day delivery within Europe. But within Africa, okay, a lot of things to unpack. All right. So situations of economic growth without development, right? They're the exceptions rather than the norm, but they do happen. And we do see this happening where when there's growth, there's no change in the human welfare, right? But ordinarily what we want to observe is that if your GDP or your production of goods and services is increasing, it should be accompanied with changes in the standard of living, in the welfare of people, right? But we've got situations, obviously, where you'll have political instability, if there's conflicts. So what happens is during these temporary shocks in the economy, the spending of the government is redistributed. So if there is any kind of instability, in Africa we know where that money goes, to the military, because they need the military on their side to be able to oppress their people so that they fall in line, right? So the military budgets in a number of unstable economies is very high, and this then lowers the spending ability or capacity of the government to reallocate to the key economic sectors, which would be investing in your education, investing in health, investing in the manufacturing sector where productive activities take place. What tends to happen is that the resources are channeled into non-productive activities, right? Non-productive activities. Discovery of natural resources, it's another major issue in resource abundant countries, because they can increase the level of GDP. And we've seen it, Nigeria, its level of GDP is high, but per capita it's low. So where is all that wealth from the oil going, right? And here's the other thing, it gets exported. This is Nigeria's wealth. Use your wealth for your country, for your people. But again, as you were saying, foreign influence. I can see a comment coming. Did you want to say something? Oh, I saw your hand going up, sorry. So there's an example. So Nigeria is not the only country with issue with oil discoveries and not using the wealth. So in Equatorial Guinea, they had oil discoveries in the 1990s, and it increased its GDP per capita from 700 USD in the 1990s to $3,700 in 2000. So there was definitely an increase in GDP. And this GDP per capita was similar to a relatively rich country, Costa Rica, in the same period, in the 2003. But that was the only similarity. When you compared the economic development of Equatorial Guinea, during that period when that income was rising, there was no change, little change in their education outcomes, in their health outcomes, and in the economic activity of the average citizen. So people were still struggling to get jobs in the country. There was no productivity taking place in the country because the resources that probably were in these key economic sectors had been diverted to this mining sector to increase the extraction of these resources, right? But again, where is the wealth going from those? And like what the gentleman at the back was saying about the extractive nature of resources in Africa due to colonialism, that has persisted. So we have maintained that trade pattern, right? So when the Westerners came, their main goal was to extract resources and they sent back to the mother country, England, and to the Americas, because they were developing North America. And it was also during the Industrial Revolution, so they needed a lot of resources. Not only natural resources, but also labor, right? So these things were extracted from Africa, and colonies were not allowed to trade with each other because you would disrupt the trade pattern of resources going to the mother country. But here's the thing, when all those events eventually came to an end, we've maintained the same trade patterns. So regional trade in Africa is very delayed. It's so low compared to us trading with these Western countries. Traveling within Africa is so expensive. It costs me the same to travel to Kenya as it does to travel to United Kingdom. Why? In Europe, you can get, if you're traveling within Europe, you can get a flight between two countries for £60 return. If you convert that, it's not a lot of rands to travel within. But here, within Africa, it costs me almost 10,000 rands to travel to Kenya. I mean, I was shocked when I was going to Kenya. I was so happy I was going to Kenya because I'd never traveled to Kenya. And then I looked at the price tickets and I was like, but this is how much I paid for my ticket to go to UK. Why do we do that? Regional travel should be inexpensive for us, the citizens of the countries. Yeah, you can increase it for the foreigners. But for us, yeah. And that's why an AU passport would be nice, like the EU passport, that gives you access to all these different markets, that gives you access to invest regionally. Because we really should be looking at improving our own continent and not helping other continents to become wealthy. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think the brain drain is one of the reasons why maybe we are underdeveloped?
And why do we have the brain drain? Why are skilled labor and sometimes even unskilled labor? Why are they going to develop? Did you hear today about the 49 Afrikaans people that were taken to Texas? I mean, there's a lot of disinformation, we know. But why? Why did they jump on that plane and go?
There's a narrative that was created following the utterances by the AfriForum and the response by Trump.
Yeah.
And I think it's not about us, like it's within Trump nature.
Yeah. That one is got nothing to do with the dynamics that are playing in South Africa. It's disinformation. Yeah, that's true. But you do pose a very important question about the brain drain, because there is brain drain, and the brain drain is from Africa. It goes, but you don't see enough skilled labor coming, and then we have these critical skills lists in our countries. Yes, sir.
I guess when we talk of the brain drain, it's also happening within each country. I'll give an example of South Africa. I come from this country. It's the situation is so dire there because a lot of good thinkers, experts migrate either to the Western province or Gauteng. Gauteng is mainly the main.
And it's such a small province.
Yeah, it's a small province, but it's the main center where economic activity is placed. I would attribute that to the ills that we are talking about. Lack of industrial development in those respective areas. So now if we talk sub-Saharan Africa, you already indicated, given an example of Nigeria, where oil is exported, it's a raw stage, and it gets imported as a final. At a more expensive price. Yeah, there's no distilleries, there's no colliery, and if you make another example about how the growth economic growth is taking place in Botswana, because they enacted policies that would protect their precious resource, which is diamond, that there shall be value adding within
the country, exactly.
The solution is that we need to embark on rigorous industrial revolution within Africa, so that we create these value, regional value chains that we were talking about, and retain our own best experts that can work in those Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of talk now about industrial policy action, right? How to use the industrial sector to our advantage.
Yeah, just to answer question partly, I mean, I'll add on to what this gentleman said. Beyond economic opportunities, because people do emigrate to seek so-called greener pastures.
Yes.
People who need economic opportunities, labor, what is the labor market? And beyond job seeking, I think also better welfare. I mean, going to the UK, for example, you mentioned national health insurance, something you might not have in some other countries. In some countries, it's free education and so on and so forth. So that could play a role in the
brain drain.
Also, some are underemployed. It's not just unemployment. So I'd rather go to a country that I know will respect my skills. I said.
1, 2, and then I'll come in because they haven't spoken yet. Yeah, okay.
So I just want to, I think you paused on the African Union passport. So my comment on that is, Africa, we're peculiar people. So to actualize some of these good
intentions, yeah,
it's going to take a very long time beyond that journey. So it's going to take a very long time because when you look at the leadership, selfish interest. I don't want to talk about you make mention about Nigeria Egypt case as scenario, but I don't want to dig into that. So it's going to take us to another place. So let's just follow what we are doing here. So serving interest of the leader. There's a lot of things that also the developed country are setting. They have program. They have that model. They put it in the systems and they know how it works. Okay? So I can tell you models we use in Europe, like in Denmark, you have another models which you use in US. So all these things are models, they are programmed. They program all those things there. So only if we can understand some of those things and then we can now work against it aggressively, that's when we can come out. Otherwise, it's going to take a very long time before we can get to all these, because we can actualize all these intentions and with mindset that we are discussing.
And I'd like to add to that point because you bring up an important dimension, right, to this whole debate on growth and development. It's simply not a question of copying and pasting what has been done in countries that have managed to develop, right? So we're always told, well, if you want to grow, follow this Western model. If you want to industrialize, follow the Asian model, of structural change that they did. But, people completely forget that there are different issues, dynamics that happened in Africa that didn't happen in those countries, right? So the Western countries, they didn't have slave trade. They didn't lose half their labor, And if you lose half your labor, and labor is so critical in production of goods and services, how do you expect those countries to grow, right? So we're already starting on our knees, and then we try and get up, and then something hit us, colonialism, right? And then again, that delayed our progress, right? So yeah, I know there's also the whole issue of how long do we remain victims? I'm not saying let's be victims about this. Yes, these things happened, but let's learn from them. Let's learn from them. And exactly as what you're saying is that the leaders that we are putting in power today, are they just a continuation of what was started by the Westerners or the foreigners that came to Africa? They created their models of institutions where their institutions were to protect their wealth. When they left and our people then were put in power, whoever, the paramount chiefs that were there already in power, did they just continue with the same patronage politics, or did they try and change that? And I think for a lot of us, we'll see that it's just continued, right? I definitely know in my country, that has just continued. It's about who you know, if you want to be in power. But we're going to discuss this when we discuss institutions, historical institutions in detail. But just, yeah.
Much longer. I think like we can keep saying Western countries, Western leaders, Western methodologies, but within our African continent, there's still those leaders or those systems that do not empower us. For an example, let me make an example with the South African case. A few months back, we had an issue with doctors who are being trained and be ready to join and help throughout. But now, the whole of the Minister of Health says, you know what, you can go in UK, get better opportunity. How can you say that?
Exactly, your own people that you've trained.
Own people that you have trained, you wasted resources on these people, but now it's time for you to deploy them so that they can help communities. Now you are saying, no, what, just go, don't have budget, just go and explore other opportunities worldwide. I think our leaders as well are not ready to ensure that we have system which they are building us. Like once a person is there, you don't want to help others. I think we can keep blaming the Western,
but we need to start looking internally. Yes. Yeah. And the choices that we are making. Yeah. Interesting.
All right. I also want to contribute. Saying the same thing. On this one, I would like to employ everyone to go check this out. Something I think is of interest. So let us look at when Africa got independence from the very early countries. Was it Ghana earliest? Ghana is one of the earliest countries to
gain independence. Yes, yes.
The 1950s, 60s especially. And then look at what the Westerners did to African leadership. You saw a lot of African leaders and a lot of prominent chiefs, children taken out of Africa to go and be educated in Western education. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew because of the proximity they have to power. One way or the other, they will come into power. And when they do come into power, we need to make sure their paradigms of thought and thinking are able to sustain our
wealth, yeah.
Keep the interest as is. So what I want to say or contribute is that this is by design. It is by design that our president here is never an entrepreneur. He never started any business, but he's a billionaire through shares from McDonald's and MTN in the 1990s, because they knew at some point he would come to power. And when he comes to power, he should be able to keep the interests of the masters intact. So whatever tickling and fiddling with the system he does means nothing. This is the same story throughout Africa and its leadership.
And I think this is what we are seeing in West Africa, is that they're trying to push back. The French, the Sahel region, the French, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they're trying to push back and saying we want the French influence to get out so that we can actually concentrate on rebuilding or building our country, see what the problem is. Because it's also very difficult to disentangle, what was left behind and what we have, the strengths we have, right? So I think that's what in a way, despite the coups and everything, but this is what they're trying, these young And I like the fact that they're also young, the leaders. Yeah, that they're young. Oh yes, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, that they're young. I just just before. I wanted to just add when he was saying about our leaders telling people to go to overseas, to get better opportunities. Overseas, like I've got a student of mine who was applying for PhD in Canada, and then he got the position, and he got the funding. And there was a sort of a stipulation that came with it, that if you get your PhD in this country, you can apply for citizenship. So they already have incentives to keep the people they train. So if you go to the States, when you've got if you go and get your PhD in the States, or, your postdoc, they have an incentive to keep you there because they want to keep the people they've trained. It's the same thing in Europe as well. They have these incentives to keep their skilled labor. But we should have similar incentives. That yes, once we've trained you, stay. We will compensate you for your skills. But again, of course, then this comes back to, do we have the resources to compensate skilled labor in our countries? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just to add to respond to Obani, you said it's more internal problem. So we are not saying it's not an internal issue. We are just saying that this foreign interest exists. For instance, before the coup, Nigeria is the largest producer of uranium, and it's widely sought all over the world. And they were selling it to France for about per ton for about €2.
Half the price.
That's not half the price. France was selling it after it being processed for about €300. And it was like crazy. And the money they realized from that alone, they would not have gotten that from any foreign aid or philanthropy or humanitarian aid. And so these things exist. I just have 2 comments on the AU passport thing. My concern stems from the propagation of extreme religious fanatics and jihadists or terrorists. We all know what's going on in West Africa. You've got these guys from Mali, you've got these guys from Niger and Burkina Faso. And then because for West Africa, we've got a unified passport. The ECOWAS passport.
Yes.
And so you could gain entrance into
Any West African country.
And then you've got, like, in quote, Fulani herdsmen who originate from somewhere, I don't know, Mid-East, somewhere like that. And then they could propagate through the country and wreak havoc. If AU comes up with the passport, how do countries protect themselves from the negative influence of other African countries? Remembering that we are so susceptible to 2 things, religion and tribe. Yeah. A fellow African could easily kill for religion, or for tribe, or for race. So this may not really work in Africa. And concerning the brain drain, like you were saying about Canada, Germany presently is facing that. A lot of Germans no longer want to go into tech, and Germany is presently doing her best to attract tech skills from Africa. Yeah, I've got a couple of friends. Once you're just good as a data,
They've got a labor shortage, yes.
and then they just put incentives, and you wake up here in Germany and you've got good health insurance and all of these things. This reinforces the assumption that these guys may do all they can do to ensure that we do not develop because they are at risk. So we have our issues, but then how do we navigate our peculiar issues with after the World War II, right, in Germany, the Western countries came together and helped Germany to grow. But we do not see the same support for Africa. Today, the whole of Africa's GDP is not even up to Germany's GDP. Just continent and one country doesn't make sense. So how do we navigate?
And yeah, that's the question. Why didn't we band together? like how they did after the World War II in Europe to rebuild Western Europe. Why didn't we band together?
We hate each other, honestly.
Yeah, so there is actually literature on culture, on how culture affects economic development, and there is talk about you, which obviously is logical, that you are going to trust someone who's closer to you in lineage than someone who's not. But here's another interesting dimension I'm going to add. The slave trade, apparently, has been cited in the literature as a reason for mistrust in Africa. Because when the slave trade was lucrative, tribes were selling each other. You are losing labor. You don't want to lose your labor, so you are going to tell the slave owners, okay, look, okay, I'll find people for you. You're not going to take your own people, right? So you're going to go to the next village and take those people and sell them to slave trade. So apparently, so there's a really interesting paper. I will add it in the folder. There's a Google folder. I'll add it in the Google folder. It's by Leonard Wanchikon and Nathan Nunn. And they talk about slave trade and the origin of mistrust in Africa. Because afterwards they said, what happened was you don't trust your neighbors, you don't trust your political leaders because the chiefs were involved. So now all of this has gone. We are sitting in parliament and someone from this party is saying, oh, let's implement, let's spend more in, I can see your hand, sir. Let's spend more in improving education outcomes. But this party is a predominant tribe. And then this person from the other tribe is thinking, but you guys were up to no good during that era. So there's a kind of mistrust. It's a very interesting, paper when you read it and the mechanisms that they explain. I mean, obviously, always, that's why I love economic development. All these issues are always debatable. You can always find a reason not to agree with that, but sometimes it's plausible. It's plausible. And when I think about it, I'm thinking, okay, if I knew someone had traded my ancestors, I would not trust them at all. So there's also the whole culture that comes in. Yes, sir.
I wanted to bring something around this developing Africa. So how then do we capture even issues around climate? Because greed is what drives corruption. That's the biggest problem. We have here in Africa, in South Africa, I'm sure there's a long queue of people who want to get into power and then enrich themselves. So I think the biggest challenge that we have is greed. So how then do we start by dealing with greed, which will in a way remove corruption, not completely, but assisting dealing with this corruption issue, so that we can then develop healing, and be able to compete with the Western counterparts.
If I can add to that, and then we'll take our break because I see it's almost our tea break. Because this is something, my husband is also an economist, so you can imagine in a house of two economists, the debates, and we come from a failed state. So you can imagine, we are very bitter and upset because, we're like, we want to be home, but, anyway, we have to make it work. So, for you to be able to take a bit and put in your pocket, your country has to be growing. Which is, so I don't understand, is when they are so greedy that you take so much from the country and you debilitate it to such an extent that it can no longer grow. So where else then are you going to get the money from? Where else are you going to get these extractive rents that you're already, taking out of the country? I just don't understand the mindset of, people that are involved in this kind of illegal activities, corruption. Because if it was me, I would be a very benevolent leader and make sure that my people are productive. I would make sure that they have what they want so that I can take my little pit by the side. No one is going to say anything because people are subjectively happy. You know, I don't know. I mean, this is just me. What do you guys, I don't know. What do you guys think? We can end on this. Yes, I can see your hand and I can see another hand there.
For me, I think we live in a changing world. If you can check very close on dynamics, even the United States of America is losing power. As we know that every empire just come for those years, it's called 100 years, but there is a point
Where they must.
going down. If you can check what exactly is happening, like currently under the Donald Trump presidency, or I think that is where the turning point will occur, because these tariffs is costing, it's going to cost the US in the long run. If you look at development that is happening in African continent, other countries now, they separate themselves from this chain of colonialism or this chain of being slave or being subject to the West. I think more like there's changing dynamics, and maybe in a space of 30 to 50 years, we might see Africa rising again. Even here, home in South Africa, there's no political party that is leading. It's GNU, and there's no stability in GNU. And a number of stuff will be exposed. There's no one that detects the direction of the economic, maybe policy-wise. As we have noticed with the budget, a lot is happening. I think it's possible for us to see these changes coming forward from now on. Thank you.
And it's interesting because you're not the first person who has said that about empires coming and going. Somebody else I was having a conversation with was saying, well, maybe this is the end of America, the US, and maybe China. It's now, Asia's time to be to run. And so he was also saying exactly what you were saying, that well, maybe in another 100 years Africa will now have sort of sorted themselves out to be in a position where they can actually take over. So I mean, I was saying, well, I won't be alive for that, but I would love to see that happening. All right, yes, sir, and then I'll end with you, then we can take our break. Oh, yes, and okay. Definitely, we'll end with you. Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, I had something else to say, but I'll mention that one. Of the empires and then ending, etc. So, if we look at economic history, we will see that Africa was involved in trade way earlier. There are artifacts that are found in Africa and in China. In southern Africa, we had the Mapungubwe, where we were trading in gold with the Asians way back. And now tell me how we were facilitating that trade and what was driving that trade, etc. And there was a point where China was the most developed country, but they fell due to protectionism. What is speaking of, they decided that they want to keep everything within themselves, etc. So indeed, the US may fall, but there is something I just want to put to you and then leave the debate. Okay. I have a view, because from history again, I think history has good lessons. From history again, we learn that empires don't just fall without a fight. And in this day and age, this is a day and age of nuclear. So your fights are not normal. It's not fights where you can rebuild after. Nuclear is not that kind of a game. So my view is, as long as Africa don't take its domestic security in terms of arming itself with nuclear weapons as well, because with nuclear it's easy. We know there will never be a nuclear war because there are no winners. But if you've got nuclear like North Korea should be flattened now by all those countries. But they can't dare touch North Korea, because even if they have a quarter of what you have in nuclear, no one wins in a nuclear war. So no one touches North Korea. So Africa should take serious its military prowess. So my view is, you only in this day and age can protect your economy through your military might.
It's interesting. It's interesting. There's a paper I put, well, I mean, it's got nothing to do with they were investing in their military expenditure, but then the story is different. But it's about Latin America and how they, because of their wars and in the 1800s and 1900s, they spent a lot in their military expenditure. But of course, that then had adverse effects on their growth path today. But yeah, that's very interesting. But and you can see that America really spends a lot and invests a lot in their military. And what was interesting as well was when, what was this, the French president Macron, when they said, okay, we need to find a way to stand alone without always relying on the United States. And I think he mentioned that we need to talk about our defense and start increasing our defense. So, that's the first thing for leaders, is that, and exactly, that's where your budget goes. So those resources now are going to start, when you see countries starting to prepare themselves, they start going into the military because your defense is important. Yes, and then, okay.
Oh, yeah, yes. So I want to lose my train of thought. But you mentioned greed and corruption. I think in Africa, we tend to incentivize corruption and reward those corrupt. You find that someone who's known to have stolen X amount of money is in an influential position,
Yes.
and impunity they still
Yeah.
without any repercussions.
Yeah, with no repercussions.
I think, there isn't any country that is free from that, but I think we need to build stronger institutions. In Europe, they also have the European Round Table. Its influence is well documented, but I think we need in Africa to build stronger institutions.
Yeah. I mean, when Trump first came into power, his first term, we all thought America was going to collapse, right? We're like, oh yeah. But the institutions, they are that strong that they could constrain him, so that it didn't affect the strength of the economy, right? And US still survived that first term, and they're still the strongest, the biggest economy, right? We don't know now because Trump has now become smart. If you've noticed, he's captured the key arms, the justice. He's capturing. He's getting influence in the military as well. So he's come back smart, and he knows that, okay, if I want support, there are certain arms of law that I need to capture so that they're on my side. But I don't know what the implications are going to be in the long term. He's only been in power for less than a year. We still have him for another 4 years. But we are already starting to feel very anxious with him in power, especially the decisions he's making. I've had a lot of my colleagues overseas that have been working on projects in Africa where they said, well, we can't continue because the aid has been stopped. And this is not good for us as well, right? But then that also brings in the whole issue, are we too dependent on aid? That then brings, it's a whole debate, a new one. Okay, last, and then, because we are eating into our tea, guys, I'm sure you guys want coffee.
Just to say that I had a professor during my undergrads who shared the same sentiments as well. Just that he extended this to this whole unorthodox perspective where he feels that corruption isn't bad for economic development.
There is literature that states that.
I can remember my professor in school. It's not bad. It's just that we should maybe legitimize corruption. And even, because back then, I'm Nigerian, by the way. We had a lot of corrupt Nigerian leaders who embezzle funds and then throw them in Swiss banks. And then 50 years after they are dead, Swiss bank comes to say that, we are going to return some funds from Abacha. And we are like, I didn't even meet Abacha. So this money was so much. And they're returning it in trillions and, big money. So he was of the opinion that when they embezzle those funds, we should find a way to ensure that they invest them in Nigeria. So you are not saying be corrupt, but we know that because they are very greedy, they are going to be corrupt. allow them to invest them in Nigeria. They employ people, generate revenue, and then corruption is not all that bad.
Yeah. No, but it's true. It's true because you are externalizing the money that you're gaining. So like in Zim, right? A lot of the money during with Grace Mugabe, a lot of that money was externalized. That was during that era, right? That was externalized instead of her using it in the country, right, to rebuild the country or to invest in capital infrastructure. You take all that money you're making from whatever mines that you own, and by the way, mines are only owned by like 1% of the population in a country. That's usually the case, and most of the times the government is involved in the ownership of those mines. And that money, the rents you're getting from that, or all that extraction of resources, what are you doing with it? You're putting it in a Swiss bank account. Come on, guys. Yeah, use it, build a refinery, like what you were saying, build an oil refinery, and, exactly, employ people, refine the oil, and then sell it at 300 euro instead of €2. It's ridiculous. Okay, guys, we could carry on. Let's take our break, and we'll be back at 11 and then we'll continue with this. So we'll look at some empirical evidence on growth.